Welcome back, I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Review, where we look at a previous design of mine from a competition and we allow our AI, Design Eye, to analyse that in terms of the principles and elements of design and give us some feedback, give me some feedback and then some suggestions for improvement. This week we are looking at a title of Flirty Foliage. Now this was from a competition that runs for about 2 weeks, so it's quite a lengthy and involved competition, and at least one of the sessions has a title in it where we can only use foliage. So it's always a great challenge, and I thought this was quite an interesting title as well. It's considerably long time ago, and I can see that my design style has evolved somewhat since that time. But it's good to look back and to see the good things that I was doing at that stage and the things that I need to improve on in this design and make sure that I'm still doing that in my current designs. The design itself was inspired by another designer who has remained a favourite of mine, Christine de Beer from Canada, and if you look her up you will see that she shows you the technique for making this particular style of design, the Monstera leaves, at least part of the design. So what I've got here is a stand that has a test tube on it to hold the fan palm that is at the back of the design. But the test tube itself is just attached to a set of what we would call duck feet, chicken legs. And so it's just wire wrapped with paper covered wire to create the stand. Then I've got 2 Monstera leaves. They've been split in half so that the one half of each leaf has just been left with the veins, and that's what's crisscrossed through the middle. And then at the back there's the fan palm. And in the centre of it I have made some roses out of dried foliage, and that's just a manipulating, a weaving technique that you can learn online as well. I think I did at that stage. I didn't know anyone that could do it here. Looking at the design, it's all edged with black lace and ribbon. Looking at the design, I can see a whole lot of things that I would do differently. I like the colours and I like the concept of the interpretation of the class title, but the actual method that I've used and the way that I have incorporated particularly the dried material in the middle, I think it's just a little bit off-putting to me. It is visually out of balance, I think, and it needs, as do many of my designs from my early years, it needs a base. It needs something that it's sitting on, because there is a very stark contrast between where the legs are and the leaf and the bench itself, which is white. So all of that said, let us see what has transpired from our analysis through our AI, Design Eye, and we'll see, I think, some of the things that I've already talked about here, but I also want to talk to you towards the end of the video about the difference between visual proportion and actual proportion, and that's in terms of plant material. So in most competitions you'll see something in the schedule that says 60, 70, 80% of fresh plant material or fresh or dried plant material has to be used, and so the rest of it can be embellishments or things that are not plant derived. And if you look at this design, that's something that you might question visually. You're drawn to the lace and to the embellishments, even though they're a very small percentage of the whole design. So we'll talk about that towards the end of the design. We'll see what Design Eye has got to say first of all. Form, first of all. The design utilises bold, flat, two-dimensional forms, which is perfect for a front-facing design. The swooping silhouette created by overlapping the Monstera and the pleated fan palm creates a distinct, recognisable shape. That's true, and the form is very sympathetic to one another in terms of the individual elements. I just feel that there's a couple of straight edges coming out of the manipulated foliage in the middle and off the ribbon off the end of the fan palm are a bit distracting, and they take away from the actual form of the overall design. It also talks about that two-dimensional forms. Yes, they are two-dimensional, but it's in a three-dimensional plane. And so I need to make sure that the depth of that design is obvious when a judge is looking at the design. So it's not just seeing these, the flat leaf and the flat leaf behind it, and not enough interest in the design to look through the design and see more. Texture. There is a brilliant interplay of textures here. The smooth waxy surface of the Monstera leaf heavily contrasts with the soft intricate scallops of the black lace and the rough matte finish of the woven foliage accents. Once again, yes, that's true. There is textural contrast, probably not as much as you would have seen in my more recent designs, but there is some textural contrast there. It's interesting that it sees the pleating of the design at the back as the same as the flat surface of the Monstera leaf. We'll see what else is said in the colour. The vibrant monochromatic greens of the living foliage are sharply framed by the black and gold lace. This creates a dramatic high contrast palette that feels distinctly stylised. So I am happy with the colours. I am happy with that very stark contrast between the green and the black, and I think that works well. I think what's distracting is the dried piece in the middle. It could still be incorporated, but I think it's in the wrong place, and it takes away from the overall impression of the design. Line. Strong sweeping curved lines dominate the outer silhouette. Inside the design, the natural fenestrations or splits of the Monstera and the structural ribs of the palm provide dynamic radiating lines. And that's interesting too, because the fenestrations in the Monstera leaf have a more curved outline than the palm itself, but it's still seeing that those lines, developing those lines, whether they're very straight or slightly curved and straight, is adding to the impact of the design. Space. The negative space created by the natural holes in the Monstera leaf allows the background to peek through, preventing the large solid green form from feeling too heavy or blocky. I agree with that. I just feel like you're looking through the design, but you're not looking at anything. And so it needs something at the back there that accentuates the interpretation of the design. And as I look at it, I'm thinking that perhaps if I'd had two palm leaves at the back, one higher than the other, then you would be able to look through those holes in the Monstera leaves, see that there was something behind, but they're structurally adding to the whole of the design as well as to that third dimension of the design. Contrast. The design relies heavily on contrast for its visual impact, specifically the contrast between the organic natural leaves and the manufactured delicate lace edge. And that's very true. I wanted that contrast to be there. I wanted it in terms of colour as much as the texture, and I think that it's probably more so there in the colour than it is the other. And I keep getting now distracted by that manipulated foliage in the middle, the dried foliage in the middle. And had I had that somewhere else, it's just out of place in terms of the whole of the design. It's really quite distracting to me now. And I think that I definitely should have taken a step back and looked at this a little bit more critically at the time that I was staging it. Balance. The design utilises asymmetrical balance. The visual weight of the woven embellishments and ribbons on the upper left is counterbalanced by the broad sweeping expanse of the lace-trimmed palm leaf reaching up towards the upper right. I don't think it's visually balanced at all, and it is that central manipulated dried foliage that is throwing me out altogether. Without that, the palm leaf is going to look like the design itself would look like it's lopsided because there'd be too much green on one side of the design. And so I would do better to do what I was talking about with the depth of having two leaves one higher than the other, but at the back of the design, so that that rounded top shape would be reflected by the rounded edges of the Monstera leaf in the front of the design. Rhythm. Visual rhythm is beautifully established through the repeating scallops of the lace border and the repeating pleated folds of the palm leaf. So yes, there is rhythm there. There's rhythm in the individual parts of the design, and there is some rhythm in the whole of the design, but it could be much, much better in terms of the whole of the design. The rhythm for the whole of the design could be much better than it is now. Dominance and focal area. The woven botanical shapes and ribbon cluster serve as a strong focal point, successfully drawing the eye to the point where the major lines of the leaves converge. I guess so. I just don't think it's in the right place, and I don't think it is the dominant feature. It is where your eye is drawn, but I don't think that adds to the value of the design, and it needs to be somewhere else or placed differently in some fashion. So let's now have a look at some of the suggestions, and I think they might be quite along the same lines as the things that I've looked at as we've gone through. So the first one is concealing the mechanics. The wire stand at the base of the design is currently visible and unfinished. Wrapping the base wires neatly in floral tape that matches the stem, or covering the base with a small neat cluster of lower foliage, would instantly elevate the professionalism of the piece. So that's probably something that I would take on board in terms of another piece of foliage on the base of the design there. And I think what it's seeing as the unfinished part of the legs is that I've wrapped the wire around the ends that are showing, and then you can see the wire that is bare in the rest of the design that's bent into the other shapes. So that's true, it's mechanics, it needs to be neat and tidy, it is part of the overall judging of a design, and so you need to take care of those things when you're looking at it, not just focus on how the design itself looks, but the mechanics are as important, not just for the physicality of the design, but for the overall impression of the design as well. Suggestion number 2 is balancing accessories and foliage. The class states only foliage to be used. While the botanical elements are exclusively foliage, the design relies very heavily on non-botanical accessories, the lace and the ribbons, to achieve its theme. Reducing the thickness of the ribbon or relying solely on woven grass or foliage for the focal embellishments might strengthen the botanical integrity of the piece. So this is what I was alluding to earlier. I think that there is a chance for this design to have lost points because the dominance of the design was the non-plant material, even though the percentages of use were correct. And I'm going to talk about that after we do the next suggestion, because I think it's worthwhile going over what it's actually telling us here about the difference between using the plant material and using accessories to tell the story of your class title. So suggestion number 3 is application technique. The attachment of the lace to the leaf edges is slightly puckered in a few areas, which interrupts the clean sweeping line of the leaves. Ensuring the adhesive or attachment method allows the lace to sit perfectly flush with the leaf's natural curve would make the execution look flawless. That's very true. If you look at the top of the palm leaf, the lace looks like it's fallen backwards. It's not standing up as straight as it is everywhere else. And then once again, it's part of the finishing off of a design, the technique of a design that makes it look like it is absolutely perfect. No room for errors in these types of competitions. You really do have to make sure that everything that is part of the design is as perfect as it can be, and that takes time and that takes a critical eye. And if you're tired, or if you've put the design together half a dozen times and you think you've done it the same way every time, you really need to stop and take a breath and look at it with the viewpoint of you are coming in to judge it critically. All right, let's just go back to that issue between the accessories and the foliage. So physical proportions in terms of design is the strict surface area and volume. The leaves need to meet or exceed 70% of the requirement for plant material. The plant material here is undeniably the structural foundation of design. So there is probably more like 80-85% that is plant material in this design. But when you look at it, your first impression, I think, is the lace, because it's such a contrast to the natural, and it's out of place. You don't expect to see lace stuck around a leaf, and so there's a bit of intrigue there as well, but you're focusing on the lace, not on the foliage, not on the leaves. So the visual way, because the black lace creates a stark high contrast border and the ribbon sits squarely in the primary focal area, these accessories carry immense visual weight. They immediately capture the eye, which can make the non-botanical elements feel as though they exceed that 30% allowance to a judge. So once again, it's about that the visual balance is as important, and the visual weight of the things that you've put into a design are as important as the actual elements that are within the design. And so once again, it's about looking at it with that critical eye of making sure that if you were looking at it independently, that the design tells the story of the class title, but it tells the story with the plant material. And the embellishments are just that, they're just added on extras. They're not the things that tell the story or the interpretation, it's the plant material that interprets the class title. So there we have our review for this week with Flirty Foliage. Again, it's a class title that I really am taken with. I haven't seen it again since, and this is probably 12 years ago that I did this particular design. I do encourage you to have a look at Floral Art Review, the website, and see how that can help you. Now, this is a case in point in terms of these proportions, the physical and the visual weight of plant material versus embellishments. How fortunate you are to be able to upload an image of a design and have the analysis done that will tell you whether you are straying into an area that the judges are going to find difficult to interpret, or whether they're going to feel that the physical and visual weights are not as evenly balanced as they could be. And you can do all of that before your competition. You can do it just in terms of if you look at a design and you think, I don't really know, it's just not quite right, don't know what's wrong with it, upload it and you'll get your review back, you'll get some suggestions for improvement. Try the improvements, think about the improvements the way I do when we're going through these sessions, and it will help you on your floral art journey. I will leave you to think about all of those things, and I will see you next week for another review. I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Review.